What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Hockey Stick Talk Nation on this special Saturday night live with my guest tonight, Mike Farwell from the Kitchener Rangers. He is a play-by-play announcer. Thanks for coming on, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for the invitation, Dan. I'm glad to be here.
We're going to have a fun night tonight. I got some good questions lined up. Hopefully some that you've never heard before and maybe some you have.
I just hope I can answer them.
I'm sure you can. But as I do here, I just want to shout out to everybody in the chat who's always popping in. They're always great to have around. So let me scroll up here. So we'll shout out to Canadian Card Breakers, CCB. We have Barry. We have Robert Springs. We have Dewey. And we have Matthew and Zach's Collections all in the house right now. So thank you all for coming tonight. Hope you enjoy the show. It should be a good one. Lots of questions for Mike, and I haven't said already, he is a play-by-play announcer for the Kitchener Rangers, which a good friend of mine, Dig, sent in to me. So thank you, Dig, for the hat. And as I told Mike backstage, new Kitchener Ranger fan here.
I love it. Now that I know that Dig sent you that hat, I'm going to have to check for the one I left at the rink last night and see if that's the one that ended up on your head there, Dan. Hey, that's quick courier, but we'll check in on that.
Yeah, it might take a little bit longer with the Canada Post strike here.
That's right. Exactly.
Shout out to Budget Rips for coming in. I guess, Mike, we'll start out with our first question for you. What was your favorite team growing up for the NHL and OHL?
I don't think I'm going to be very popular if I tell the truth on this, but I am a lifelong Leafs fan. Always have been, always will be. And because I was born and raised in Kitchener, the Kitchener Rangers were absolutely my favorite OHL team. So for me, when it came to road hockey, Saturdays, you're not at school and you'd get up and you'd pretend when you're in the driveway that you're Brian Bellows or Al McGinnis from the Kitchener Rangers, which were the big players for the Rangers when I was a kid. And then you'd watch Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday. And let me tell you, if it was a Leafs-Habs game, I would be nervous all day. And then I'd watch the game at night. And then on Sundays, when we were back out playing road hockey, I'd be wearing my Toronto Maple Leafs Daryl Sittler sweater. So that's those are the two teams that were my favorites and remain my favorites to this day.
Nice. And I was looking up a little bit today, but the Rangers weren't always the Rangers, were they? They were another team before they were the Kitchener Rangers.
I think there was one year that they were the Kitchener Canucks, and then they became, after that, the Peterborough Petes. So we always like to joke, and those are two teams in the Ontario Hockey League with great tradition and history, the Petes and the Kitchener Rangers. And yeah, so the Canucks became the Petes, and then a year later, it's actually a really great story. There was a local businessman by the name of Eugene George who bought the team from the city of Guelph and relocated it to Kitchener and gifted it to the community for the princely sum of $1 because he just thought that the city of Kitchener deserved and would benefit from having a major junior, at the time OHA, Ontario Hockey Association team. So he made it happen. He gifted it to the community. And to this day, that happened in 1963. And now what are we, 61, 62 years later, it remains a community-owned hockey club. There is no owner. It's a nonprofit organization. So any money that's earned or made goes back into the community for various initiatives, including a lot involving sports, etc. But that's really how the Kitchener Rangers came to be.
And that's really awesome that it's owned by the community pretty much.
It absolutely is. Every season's ticket holder is a shareholder. They go to an annual general meeting every year. They've got a voting share in the team.
That's awesome. And I've seen that a lot of great coaches have come out of there. As a coach myself, one that recently pops into mind is Peter DeBoer.
Oh boy. I could tell you stories about Pete DeBoer. I joke actually that to this day, I'm intimidated and or afraid of Pete. But yes, he arguably, Dan, was one of the best we ever had in this organization. And that's saying an awful lot when you go back to some of the guys, the Joe Croziers, the Joe McDonnells of the world. The guy they've got in here right now, who's just in his second year as a head coach in the Ontario Hockey League, a fellow by the name of Jussi Ahokas. He's from Finland, and he's the first European head coach in the Ontario Hockey League. He's been terrific. But yes, Pete DeBoer would absolutely. Orville Tessier is another name that comes to mind. Coached the team to their first Memorial Cup back in the 80s. But Pete DeBoer, without question, remains arguably one of the best the organization has ever had. And I'll tell you what, he left here after the 2007-2008 season and took the team to a Memorial Cup. We lost that year in the final to Spokane, but won the OHL championship that year. And then he left for the job in Florida, originally his first job in the National Hockey League. We're still pulling for him, Dan. We want to see Pete DeBoer and his sidekick. That's not a nice way to put it, but he and Steve Spott have been a coaching duo since their days here in Kitchener. And gosh, do I want to see them win a Stanley Cup. I want them so badly to win.
Pete DeBoer has a really good team in Dallas too. I think it might be one of his stronger teams that he's had to coach.
Well, and it's not the first strong team he's had to coach, right? He had a good team in San Jose, he had a good team, a team that was so good in Vegas, it won the year after he was fired, right? So I think he made a lot out of that New Jersey team. I mean, God, it just goes to show how good a coach he is. But you know what I like the best about watching Pete DeBoer now, and granted, it's a different Pete DeBoer. As we age, we mature. As you're in the game longer and you see more and more things, I love his demeanor, because let me tell you, there were times we'd have to do pre-game or post-game interviews, and the man was a little crusty. He was a little crusty at times, but what's he want to listen to a guy like me for, or listen to me ask him questions? So I watch him now, and he's almost relaxed and friendly with the media. We had a much different relationship, and that's okay. I'm not knocking it at all, but he was here to coach, to be a coach, to develop as a coach, and to move on to the National Hockey League. I like to think that all of the interviews, and we would have done, my goodness, like hundreds over the years of his time in Kitchener. I'd like to think those interviews that I did with him helped him a little bit prepare for what he's dealing with in the National Hockey League.
Definitely. I know as a coach, I don't get the interviews. I just get the parents.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
But you know what? Like, I hear a lot of horror stories about parents in hockey, but I've been blessed. I've had some really great parents, and they outweigh the bad ones too.
I think, yeah, that's true pretty much across the board. And remember, in this league that I'm in, the Ontario Hockey League, when Pete DeBoer was coaching here, he would have been dealing with the parents then too.
Yeah. And then my next question. We just recently talked about Al McGinnis, and you said you watched him as a Kitchener Ranger. He actually lives in Cape Breton, which is about an hour away from me, and actually works at the local arena there. So I'm hoping to maybe one day run into him, because I want to see him with a slap shot with one of the new composite sticks, because I think he would still break the records on that.
I'll tell you what, that guy could shoot like nobody else. No doubt about it. One of those players that when he was here, you knew there was a bright and long future for him. And it's so interesting because, as you mentioned, he's originally from Atlantic Canada. He played a year in, I believe it was Saskatchewan, but somewhere in one of the Western provinces, and then ended up here in Kitchener. So this kid at the age of 16, by the time he's 17 or 18, he's in his third league, really, from Atlantic Canada to the western part of the country to central Canada here in Ontario. And of course, we all know about his National Hockey League career, Stanley Cups, etc. He was actually back in Kitchener last season. They did a reunion, a 40-year reunion of the 84 championship team. And oh gosh, was it great to talk to him. The stories he had, he talked about actually being out and hammering pucks into the side of the barn, because what else did he have to do when he was a kid growing up in Nova Scotia, right? In rural Nova Scotia, there's like he would ride his bike and he would shoot hockey pucks. That's what he did.
And I mean, too, for a kid like that to come from around here, that doesn't happen often for them to go to the OHL. Usually they'll stay to the QMJHL here. But to see him go to that route was kind of different and kind of exciting. So I could just imagine how it would have been for him to travel there and go play against these kids that he's never seen.
Yeah, I still think that the Kitchener Rangers at the time, and I believe Mike Penny was the general manager who made it all happen. But I think they worked out some kind of magic, Dan, to get Al McInnes here to Kitchener to play for the Rangers. I'll tell you
Yeah,
that.
definitely. And then my next question for you is, who's your favorite player current and past in the NHL and current and past with the OHL?
Current in the NHL, I like you and I were talking backstage. I'm a huge Sidney Crosby fan. Very difficult for me to not be a fan of Connor McDavid. And that includes when he was in the Ontario Hockey League with the Erie Otters, and I got to watch him play here. But present day, and I know I'm showing my bias here, but I think Austin Matthews is almost underrated compared to those guys, considering the effort, the work that he puts in. I think he's got a strong 200-foot game, and he scores better than anybody in the league. So my favorite player today has got to be Austin Matthews, although honorable mention goes to guys like Connor McDavid, and Sidney Crosby is always going to hold a special place in my heart, especially from that golden goal. I remember very well where I was and who I was with when that one was scored. There are so many. It's like asking me my favorite kid, Dan. Come on, But so yes, I'll go with Matthews today. And historically, gosh, again, growing up as I will go. Favorite ever would have to be Wayne Gretzky, and I mean zero disrespect to Alexander Ovechkin and any Ovechkin fans or Capitals fans, but my hockey world belongs with Gretzky owning every record. So I'm having a hard time watching this chase because I know Ovi's going to get there, but Gretzky for sure, all time, my absolute favorite NHLer. When it comes to the Ontario Hockey League, boy, oh boy, that is a great question, because I've had the chance to see, a bunch of guys that you knew were going to be really good juniors and wouldn't go on to a pro career, but you develop this relationship with them where you just like the way they played the game. I mean, Marty St. Pierre was one of those. A fellow by the name of Jason Akeson in Kitchener was one of those. But Gabriel Landeskog jumps out to me for sure, who obviously came through the Kitchener Rangers organization. Drew Doughty was with Guelph here in the Ontario League. I mentioned Connor McDavid as another example. Just a terrific young man. Like, you could tell he came into this league at 15 and he was already so mature. So those guys certainly stand out. And then today I would watch very closely because it's his draft year. So some NHL team is going to be calling his name in the first round next June. A fellow by the name of Porter Martone. He plays for the Brampton Steelheads in the Ontario Hockey League. And like I said, he's going to be a first rounder next summer to an NHL team. He's a player I love watching today. And then I know we're going to get to talking about him a little bit, but with the team I cover, defenseman by the name of Cameron Reed is just a terrific, not only hockey player, but young man as well. Those guys stand out. Martone, Cameron Reed. I might even throw Matthew Schaefer, a defenseman for Erie, into the mix of players in the Ontario Hockey League that I really enjoy today.
Awesome. We had a question coming in from Barry. He said, who was or is your favorite player to interview?
Oh, Barry, good question. The one that gives me the longest answers. How about that? I'll tell you what, you get used to it after a while, but early on it was tough because you almost forget when you're watching them on the ice. These are 16 to 20-year-old young men, and they're not always the most well-spoken. But, a fellow that comes to mind, and I think he's still doing his own podcast. What's he call it? Sticks and anyway, Cam Jansen. So if you remember Cam Jansen from the National Hockey League, I know he had a cup of coffee with Jersey. I think he was in St. Louis for a minute. Anyway, Cam Jansen played for the Guelph Storm in the Ontario Hockey League, and he was the same kind of guy in the O as he was in the show. He was a guy that was best known for his physical play and fighting, but boy, oh boy, did this guy have a sense of humor, and he was great. He had real personality, and you don't get a whole lot of that. In fact, I'd say you get less and less of it because these guys are so well scripted and don't offer a whole lot. But Cam Jansen, maybe 20 years ago or so, was just incredible to interview.
Awesome. Just want to give 2 shout-outs to IGH, Dig It, and the Loud Collector for popping in. Thanks all for coming in. So I guess, Mike, for me, as a new Kitchener Rangers fan, what should I look forward to from this team from here to, say, the future?
You came in at the right time, Dan, because this team is right at the very beginning of a build that they hope to take to a Memorial Cup in 2027. So 2 more seasons after this one. There's a lot of talk. The Rangers aren't keeping it a secret that they'd like to host the Memorial Cup in 2027. And of course, when you are the host team, you get an automatic berth into the cup, but you also have to show that you have a good enough team that would be able to compete for it. They don't just give it to the last place team and say, okay, you'll get to be in the tournament just because you won the right to host it. So you have to have a good team. And the team right now in Kitchener is really building in that direction. There is some really strong young talent. I already mentioned the head coach, which is just a 3-headed coaching monster that the Rangers have right now, a group that works really well together. So I really think, Dan, in the near future, in the next 3 years or so, you include this one, and then the 2 years following are going to be really fun, successful years for Kitchener Rangers fans.
So I know on my show last night, me and my guest talked a little bit about the OHL, and we were saying, like, what's the life expectancy of an OHL team? Like, because you're going to have, is it like 3 years and then they rebuild, or is it 2 years and then they rebuild? Because we were thinking, like, as a fan, like, how your ups and downs, really, like when you expect to rebuild or when should your team compete?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I think makes this game so interesting, exciting, and makes the job of a general manager in major junior hockey, whether it's the WHL, the OHL, or the QMJHL. You have to accept that cycle that exists because players age out of the league. And then you have to know when it's your turn in the cycle that you might be able to make that run and go after a championship. So 2 years, 3 at the outside is usually the way it goes. The championship teams are usually full of 19-year-old players. So obviously you're drafting them into the league at the age of 16. And if you've got a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds on your team, you're going to be at the bottom end of that cycle. But then they're 17 and 18 years old, and then they're 18 and 19 years old. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a team that's going to be competitive. So generally speaking, I would say there's a nice solid 2-year window in there, maybe even extending it to 3. And the exception to that rule is the London Knights, because all the London Knights seem to do ever since the Hunter brothers took over the franchise back in the early 2000s is win. The running commentary in the Ontario Hockey League is that the London Knights do not rebuild, they reload. And they seem to be perennially the favorites in the Western Conference.
That's awesome, because I know where I'm at right here in Nova Scotia. I'm an hour from the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles, an hour from the Halifax Mooseheads, and 2 hours from the Moncton Wildcats. So I got to see Ehlers, McKinnon, Drouin. I got to see all of them come through the Mooseheads, especially when they had that amazing run where they won the Memorial Cup right on. And that was probably one of the best Halifax teams I've seen. And I got to see Marc-Andre Fleury play with the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles when he was younger. So, like, I have a lot of the Q teams, but what I really like is the OHL has a lot more teams. So you get to see a lot of different players. Here in the Q, it's just the Nova Scotia and the Quebec. That's it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And obviously, population helps an awful lot where we are in Ontario, and we're very close to Toronto, which has got, I think Toronto could have its own junior hockey league, to be honest with you. But what you just talked about, Dan, is what makes me like the major junior game as much as I do. You get to watch players, and you probably pay 25 or 30 bucks a ticket. And then the next year they're going to be in the National Hockey League, and you'll have to pay 250 to 300 bucks a ticket. But you see these players before they become big NHL superstars, and it's so much fun to say, I was there when.
Yeah, definitely it is. Like same with Marchand and Moncton. Like I'd see him in Moncton, so it was nice to see like these guys when they started out to now. Because I can say, oh man, when he started, he was not like this. But
Absolutely.
I find too, and I don't know, you might be able to test more to this than I can. But I find the WHL is a lot more defensive focused. I see they produce a lot more defensemen because it's a physical league out there.
Yeah, and then you guys down east produce all the goaltenders, apparently, right? So you got each league has got its specialties, maybe. But I get totally caught up in what's going on in the Ontario Hockey League, so I don't have a ton of time to keep up with the other sides of things. But I do have a good friend who coaches in the Dub with Everett, and another buddy of mine is the play-by-play voice for Cape Breton. So I
Oh,
keep up with
nice.
I keep up with the other leagues that way. And there's another fellow that does a show out of Alberta called the Pipeline Show. Guy Flaming is his name, and he's been doing it for 20 years. I think this was his 20th anniversary of the show. Anyway, he's a great resource for me too in terms of keeping up with what's going on in the West.
And something I wanted to talk to you about because I heard on your podcast the other night is this thing with the NCAA. So, if I'm getting this right, so are the players for the O going to be eligible to play in the NCAA?
That's right. It's one of the biggest changes, Dan, that we've seen to hockey at this level probably ever. And that's not an exaggeration. What the rule in the NCAA had been, they just changed it about a month ago. But before they changed it, the NCAA considered major junior hockey in Canada, the CHL, so the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, the Quebec Major, the Quebec Maritime, they call it now Junior Hockey League. They considered that a professional league. They said the players were paid. That makes them a professional. If you skate one shift, one game, even as an emergency call-up in the Ontario Hockey League or the Western League or the Quebec League, you are not eligible. You lose your eligibility for the NCAA, which we thought for the longest time was the goofiest thing ever, especially with, the name, image, and likeness money that's going around in the NCAA. But anyway, they've changed that rule, and starting next season, even if you play in the CHL, you can also maintain your NCAA eligibility. So we've already seen a ton of player movement. We're going to see a ton more. And to answer your question directly, yes, it now means a player could be playing one time for the one night for the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles, and the next night he's at the University of Maine because he's decided to go to the NCAA.
That's I think it's going to be a hit or miss for that, really, because you might see some of your best players go play like in the States.
Yeah, I think there will be some fine tuning to this over the next little while. I mean, for either the NCAA or the Canadian Hockey League, the franchises are going to need some sort of certainty with things, right? We talked earlier already about how difficult it is with hockey at this level in the CHL to build a team because you only have maybe a 3-year window. So how do you set things up so that the team is ready to go for it when you think they are, things like that? If you add in an element where players are jumping back and forth between or thinking of jumping back and forth between your team and the NCAA, that sort of thing, that's just not going to work. How do you build a championship team around your first round picks if they're going to jump over to the NCAA within 1 year? So I think we're going to see some parameters, guardrails put around player movement, and they might have to have a minimum number of years service to one league or the other. We'll see how it sorts itself out. But I would expect something like that will be happening not too far down the road.
Just want to give a quick shout out to a couple of new people popped in. Paul in the 619, Autograph Fisherman, and Christopher Works. Thanks you all for all coming. So, Mike, as we talked backstage, I showed you a little bit about this. We've been following 3 of the Kitchener Rangers who this is their draft year. I don't really know too much about them, so I'm kind of hoping you can shed some light on us for us. And the 3 that we're following is one that you already mentioned. That's Cameron Reed. And then we're following the center, Luca Romano. And then the right winger, Tanner Lane.
Tanner Lamb, yep.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could shed the light on a couple of these guys for us a little bit.
Happy to do that. And I've been trying to keep half an eye on the chat as well. Thanks to everybody who's hit that subscribe button on the OHL Podcast YouTube channel. I really appreciate that. Means a lot. As for those players you just mentioned, Dan, 3 strong players. So there's an interesting rule in the Ontario Hockey League that I think teams have been taking advantage of lately because it's been happening a lot. And the Rangers were one of those teams that took advantage of it. So if you draft a player in the first round and they do not report to your team, and then another team in the league says, well, we think we can get him to sign here, and that team acquires the rights to the player that you drafted, you get a compensation pick the next year. So you get 2 first rounders because your first rounder did not report. He's declared a defected player. So you get that compensation pick the next year. So those 3 players that you're talking about now with the Kitchener Rangers, Cameron Reed, Luca Romano, Tanner Lamb, both Reed and Romano were first round picks for the Kitchener Rangers. They got them 10th and 11th overall in the draft a year ago. And then they got Lamb in the second round. So it speaks to how highly regarded they are and how the Rangers, that just gives you a little background as to how they were able to get such highly regarded players within the first 40 picks of the draft. It really helped out that they had that compensation pick in the first round. So I'll start with Lamb, who was the second rounder. And just last night, actually, recency bias here, but I can go from very recent memory. This kid is so shifty on the ice, and he made this play that I think the defenseman is still looking for the puck, that Lamb just danced around him and set up a great play in front. They didn't end up scoring, but it was a perfect example of how creative this guy is offensively. I know for sure that the coaching staff would love to see him shoot more. He's a little bit more of a playmaker than a shooter, but they say he's got a good shot. He should use it more. And the other thing for sure when it comes to Tanner Lamb is he's going to have to put some size on. He's 17 now in his draft year. It's already a big boys league in the Ontario Hockey League, and he's a smaller player. I have no doubt that he'll get there, but that's definitely something he's going to need to work on. And then as he does that, I think he'll be more inclined to get into those dirty areas we talk about instead of working on the perimeter. And as good as he is, he's so good with the puck. He's going to have to get a little bit stronger. And then, as I said, the coaches would love to see him shoot it more.
If you could, Mike, if you could compare him to a player, who would you compare him to?
Oh, goodness. I'm terrible at comparables, Dan. I really am. And that's because truly I spend so much time focused on just like we have a 68 game schedule in the Ontario Hockey League. It starts in late September and goes through. So I'd sound like a moron, honestly, if I tried to give him any comparable. So I'll try to avoid sounding too dumb on your show tonight. Okay. But like I said, he's going to have to get a little stronger, take that shot more. And he's definitely got the skill though. Like what this kid does with the puck is absolutely incredible. Luca Romano is a really impressive story to me because like Lamb, he's a smaller guy, super creative, and got some speed as well. But I wondered about him when I was watching him last year, and there was one game in particular. He had a 3-point night, and it was in the playoffs. And you're thinking, okay, like this is the sort of thing that a first rounder you might expect to see. It takes a long season to develop, etc. Then he kind of has this coming out party in the playoffs. But let me tell you, this kid Romano this year is night and day compared to last year. He's put on a little bit of muscle, and he is not afraid. Like he's still smaller in stature, might be 5'10", but he will go anywhere that puck goes. So he's not afraid to get his nose dirty. He'll skate into traffic. He'll dig in corners for pucks. He's gotten a lot stronger, super creative, great shot. Love the vision. This kid is absolutely, he's trying to play his way, I'm sure of it, into the first round conversation in the NHL draft in June. I don't know that he'll get that high, but he certainly has all the tools, and I have no doubt he's going in the top 3 rounds, likely the top 2 next June, and definitely a guy that you'll see more of in the years ahead. So that guy's got future NHLer written all over him. And then I left Cameron Reed for last because this is a guy that even before he got to Kitchener was described to me as future captain material. And I look at him now, and having gotten to know him a little bit, I would 100% agree with that. The kid's got leadership. He just oozes leadership. Tremendous skater. And I watch him now. I mean, I would never go so far and be so bold as to, use a Bobby Orr comparison, but this guy has no qualms about going end to end. So a lot of fun to watch. And this guy's going to have a C on his sweater at some point. He's going to be a captain in the Ontario Hockey League with the Kitchener Rangers. And I think he's also trying to play his way into the first round conversation. And I have little doubt that he will be chosen in the first round.
Sorry, Mike, I'm losing my camera here for some reason.
I saw you disappear there. I could still see your timer though in the little avatar.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but I lost the camera. So, but I'm still here. While I try to fix this, there we go.
There it is.
Technical difficulties over here.
Dan is back.
So yeah, and then about Cameron Reed, or did we just go over that?
Yeah, I just finished on Reed,
okay.
and I'll just in a nutshell, this guy is he's a stud. No two ways about it. He's a stud.
Awesome. My next question for you is, because I've always wondered this. So for the OHL, do they draft from the Toronto area, or can they go all over?
Oh, they can go all over. There's even an import draft that happens separate from the regular priority selection or the regular draft. So you get the European players drafted as well. So yeah, okay. they go anywhere. Yeah, I mean, sorry, they are geographically limited to Ontario, and then certain states where they have a footprint: Pennsylvania, Michigan.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So they can't draft someone from the East Coast or whatever.
Right. Unless, so we actually, it's interesting. There's a million loopholes, Dan. We were talking earlier, I think it was backstage, about Al McInnes and, a maritime boy ending up out west and then in the Ontario League. There is a kid actually that just came to Kitchener this year by the name of Caden Schneider. He's a defenseman. He's from the Calgary area in Alberta, but his dad played in the Ontario Hockey League. And if your parent does, same went for John Sim. John Sim played in the Ontario League. So both his sons, Landon and Lane, came through the Ontario League as well. So I think that's the basis of the rule. If your parent played in the league, you can be eligible for the OHL draft. And that's how we ended up with Caden Schneider.
Okay. My next question for you is, what would be the next draft prospect for the Rangers that we should really look out for, like saying coming up?
Oh boy. You know what? I would love to be able to give you a great definitive answer on that. The first round pick that the Rangers had this year got injured in the preseason, and so we haven't even had a chance to see him play yet. There is a young defenseman by the name of Alexander Bolecki, who's been a lot of fun to watch. And I think this kid's going to develop into something too. So keep your ears peeled for the name Bolecki. Not this next June, but in 2026.
And then Dig had a question here. Who would be your sneaky sleeper upside pick for the Rangers roster?
So you mean for the draft, like the NHL draft in June? Is that what we're, sorry, Dig, I just want to make sure I'm getting I'm assuming you're going pro. So sleeper upside pick from this Ranger roster to get picked up by an NHL team. Let me see. I wish it was a year ago, because we had this kid by the name of Luke Ellenis, and the way his game developed, we just knew that he was headed somewhere. And sure enough, he was a 4th rounder, I think is where he ended up going, to the Ottawa Senators. Sneaky sleeper pick. You know what? Goaltender. Jackson Parsons. This kid has been lights out in the month of November. I think it would be awesome for a team to take a flyer on this guy.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, and Jake said yeah for the NHL. My next question is, did you always want to be in hockey?
Yes. Short answer, yes. I could never play the game worth a hoot, Dan. I mean, I tried my best, but I was more of an ankle skater than anything else. But always, when I was a kid, I was telling you earlier about watching those games on Hockey Night in Canada, and I would turn down the volume and I would have my own little tape recorder out and I would practice my own play-by-play from the time I was about 7 years old. So I always thought it would be a great way to be involved in the game and stay in the game, even though I knew I would never be a player. So, yes, that's the short answer. Always wanted to be.
And then my next question to follow up on that question is, how did you start out? So, how did you start out to get into the business?
Well, yeah. So if you don't count doing your own play-by-play into a tape recorder while you're watching a game on TV, I just always had this interest in it. So I went to school. I studied broadcasting. I took a 3-year program at Conestoga College in Kitchener to learn about radio and television broadcasting and production. And then I applied for job after job after job until I finally got hired, and I did. And I've worked at a whole bunch of different radio and TV stations over the years. I reached out to people who were in the business for advice to see if they could, help me or give me pointers and things like that. But that's honestly what it was. I had the idea this is what I wanted to do. I went to school for it. I applied for jobs, and I was one of those guys that said yes to every chance that he got along the way. So I originally went out west and I covered the Kootenay International Junior Hockey League. The Sicamous Eagles were the team that I covered in the interior of British Columbia. And I was just there as a reporter, but that was my first sports job. I made the short list for the Fort McMurray Oil Barons play-by-play job way back in like 1997 or 8, in and around there anyway. Didn't get it, but made the short list, which, encouraged me to keep trying. And then when I left out west, I was up in Thunder Bay for a while, covered some sports up there. And when I came back to Southern Ontario, I worked my way into doing university sports with Rogers TV and continued to work my way up from there.
Nice. Barry had a question here, and I just wanted to highlight because he just recently lost his brother. And he just had this. My brother passed away last week, so I'd love to hear about your handling the loss of 2 sisters within 9 months and about farewell for hire and fundraising through odd jobs. I love the Clement quote.
Yeah, Barry, my condolences, friend. It is not easy, that is for sure. And that Clemente quote you're referring to, the great Roberto Clemente, I joke sometimes, Dan, and you asked a moment ago if I always wanted to be in hockey, which the answer is absolutely yes. But, if you catch me on a nice July day with a cold beverage and a hot dog in my hand sitting at the ballpark, I might just tell you that baseball is my favorite sport. I love that game as well. So, and I don't golf. So there's my off season. I go to ball games, and in the wintertime, I'm in a hockey arena. But I happened to read Roberto Clemente's biography, and there was a quote in there that said, if a person has the ability to help others and fails to do so, they have wasted their life. And that really struck me. And of course, anybody that knows anything more about Roberto Clemente, he wasn't just an all-star baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates, but he was a great humanitarian as well. And he actually died in the midst of a humanitarian mission when his plane crashed. So it's an incredible story. But this guy gave back is the long and the short of it. So I don't know if I have a good answer as to how you deal with the loss of a sibling. I don't know if I dealt with it well. I just dealt with it. And this for me goes back many, many years. And I think maybe one of the differences for me is that my sisters had a terminal illness, cystic fibrosis, which is the disease they suffered from, still has no cure. So we knew that they were not going to live long, but it was many decades. I lost them way back in the 1990s. And I didn't start doing my fundraising until well into the 2000s. So it was probably 20 years or more before I started. And it was the Clemente quote, among some other things, that really stuck with me. And I thought, well, it's easy for Roberto Clemente to do humanitarian work because he's a Major League Baseball player and he's got the money and the resources and this and that. But I just thought, well, maybe inside each of us, we've got something that we can give back. And one of the things that I do is talk a lot. I talk for a living, and not everybody is comfortable on a microphone. So I started doing some MC work for local organizations. I just started volunteering my time, for charities and stuff like that to help them get through various events when they wanted to have somebody more professional to be their MC. And that just one thing led to another, and I started turning it into a bit of a fundraiser for charity.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. For me as a coach, I always preach to the kids I coach, we got to give back. So we try to every 2 weeks to either go to a kitchen or something to give back to the community to help out.
Good for you. That's amazing.
So we have what we call here is called Crush the Halls, where we give back to something. So we're filling up a hockey bag for all food bank donations.
I love it.
And we're going to take that to the food bank.
Way to go.
So just something to help out and help show the kids that there's more to hockey than just playing. There's the off-ice stuff as well. And then this comes from Paul. So has Mike announced anything besides hockey?
Yes, sir, I have. In the earliest days when I first started out with Rogers TV, I made it clear hockey is what I want to do. And they had the OHL as part of their sports programming. But those jobs weren't available right away. So I did university sports. So I called basketball. I called football. I even called a volleyball game once, and lacrosse. Mostly, though, it was football and basketball. And then as soon as a hockey job came up, I jumped at it because I kind of sucked at the other ones. I'm not going to lie. I'm not even so sure I'm any damn good at hockey yet, but I try.
So my next question is, because we were talking a little bit about this backstage, and I've always wondered, so how does a play-by-play announcer prep for game day? Because I know how a player and a coach do, because I coach, so I know how I prep for game day. For me, I watch Miracle on Ice, I do up my lines, and I take quotes from the great Herb Brooks, who I really loved as a coach. I take his quotes and I use them. And it really helps me motivate the kids I coach.
I love it. That's great motivation and great inspiration to take, Dan. Way to go. It's funny you ask that because I think, I could be wrong, but every person that does play-by-play, does a job like I do, probably does it differently, does it in their own way. And, since social media became so prevalent, I don't know about you, but I've seen lots of guys in play-by-play booths showing pictures of what their setup looks like and what their notes look like. And my notes look nothing like their notes. But I'll tell you what I do and what has worked for me. I definitely prepare. And by prepare, I mean spend 2 to 3 hours before every game getting ready for that night's or that day's game. And then, of course, when I'm not at the rink, it's just trying to keep up with what's going on in the league and the tidbits of information. So I'm like a sponge that way. But on a game day, it's 2 to 3 hours before the game. I'm at the rink. I'm starting to get ready. I'm conducting interviews for my broadcast. I'm talking to people to learn more information about things, etc. And then I'm getting ready to go on the air. The number one thing that I take most seriously as a play-by-play guy is, of course, getting the names right. And it's not just the names right, but I want to pronounce them properly as well. And as you well know, there aren't a whole lot of Smiths and Joneses in the leagues anymore, right? So that's something that I take a lot of pride in, and I take very seriously. So I spend time making sure I get those pronunciations right, those names right. And I write them out by hand before every game, because that's what I've learned about myself is that's a good way for me to make the connection between the player on the ice and my memory. And I think also in a 20-team league, I mean, we play some teams 8 times in a season. And maybe I'm lucky because it's the way my brain works, but once I see a team, honestly, by the third period, I've got them nailed. Like if I forget a name or two along the way, it'll just be, Owen Sound has the puck as opposed to mentioning the player by name. But by the third period, I've got everybody down pat. And by that second or third time I see them in the season, I wouldn't even need, like, you could ask me who wears number 16 for the Owen Sound attack, and I'll tell you it's Jake Crawford. Like, it's just, it comes automatically to me, but it's a small league. So I think that helps a lot. I don't know how I do in a 32-team NHL system and not see the teams as often, but the OHL, I think, fits perfectly for me.
That's awesome. Like I know as a coach in our league, I've seen all these kids play because I've been playing against for years. So, but when they change the number, it really messes me up. So, like one year they'll be 22 for that whole 3 years, and then he's got a new number. Now I'm like, who is this kid?
I know.
So the numbers, I was used to the numbers and knowing who's who, but now they switch numbers because they see their favorite player wearing this number, or so they want to imitate. And now I'm like, who is this kid? So I have to look at the helmet and see, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's him. That's him.
We still have a team. We still have a team in the OHL, the North Bay Battalion, and they let their players use 2 through 28. There are no 90s, 80s, none of that nonsense. And I love it. I'm old school, baby. I'm old school. Get rid of these knucklehead numbers. Just 2 to 28. That's what you're getting. Take your pick.
Definitely. My next question is, do you travel with the team? That's what I've always wondered, if a play-by-play announcer travels with the team or if he stays and does the play-by-play off like a teleprompter.
I travel with the team. So I go to every rink, which I want to continue doing until I'm done doing this. And I don't know that I'll be able to, but we'll see. Because as you probably know, even the pros in Toronto, Joe Bowen and Jim Ralph, don't travel with the Leafs anymore. And as a play-by-play guy, it's obvious. Like you can tell when they're not in the arena. During COVID, when we played in bubbles and we had empty arenas, it was so strange. And we couldn't travel to every rink for health and safety purposes. So we had to call games from monitors in a studio, and it was awful. One of the big things is that the broadcast coverage of the Ontario Hockey League isn't where I think it should be. So some of the feeds I was getting were just, I didn't know what the hell was going on half the time. But when you're not in the arena, you can't see the whole ice. You can't feel the energy of the building. It was just awful. So I feel like I'm pretty fortunate to still get to be with the team and go to all of the various rinks, and I hope that never ends.
Dig had a question here. Which team coming into the auditorium has given you the most memorable rivalry game?
Hands down, the London Knights. Without question, zero hesitation, the London Knights. And what's interesting about that, it's a great question, Dig. My broadcast partner today says it's only a rivalry if it's competitive. And for the last 10 years, London has absolutely owned the Kitchener Rangers. Now, in fairness, London has basically owned every other team in the OHL too. They've just been so strong. But historically, London, Kitchener, London, absolutely incredible. And I'll give a 1B shout out to the Plymouth Whalers, who aren't even in the league anymore. They folded and became the Flint Firebirds now. But Kitchener Plymouth back in the day too was legendary stuff. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, and so my question for you is there one arena that you would really love to broadcast from? Like, I know for me, I would love to go to Madison Square Garden for one game. But as an announcer, is there one arena that you would really love to go to and announce from?
That's a fantastic question, Dan. That's a fantastic question. Obviously, well, see, again, I'm old school. I would love to do one from Maple Leaf Gardens. Scotiabank Arena doesn't excite me as much, so Madison Square is a great example for you. I got actually to call a game from Canadian Tire Center in Ottawa. the Ottawa 67's junior team, their rink was under renovation. So they were playing out of the NHL rink, and I got to call a game from there, which was really weird and really cool because the building was so big. I was so far away from the ice. I wasn't used to it, right? Man, a building I would like to call a game from. I mean, the old Forum, even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Leafs fan, like who wouldn't want to go to those historic buildings, right? Are there any of them left? I don't think there are. The old Chicago Stadium's gone. Joe Louis is gone. I might have to join. Will you take me with you and we'll go to Madison Square together? How about that?
Definitely.
Okay.
Let's go.
All right.
Let's go. I just think Madison Square Garden, with all the history that has, and I just think as soon as you walked in those doors, just the sheer presence of it would just mean so much.
And maybe you're so right. You nailed it. That's probably the best one. But I might throw in Nashville or Vegas because they just look like fun.
Yeah, definitely. And another good one is if the Nordiques still had a team.
Oh, good one. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
That Montreal Nordique rivalry, just walking in those doors, I think that'd be fun too.
Fantastic stuff.
But another question for you, as a broadcaster, is there anyone you look up to for broadcasting? Like, I know like Bob Cole's a good one. Like, is there one guy that you look up to more than the others?
I was very fortunate at a local level, Dan, to have a fellow in Kitchener by the name of Don Cameron. Before I started doing Kitchener Rangers games, Don Cameron was the only guy that had ever done Kitchener Rangers games. He did it for 55 years. He did over 4,000 games. I grew up listening to him, and I got to know him personally and even work with him later on. I learned so much from him, not only about broadcasting and doing that well, but how you carry yourself off the ice and behind the scenes. He was just a professional through and through. Absolutely loved every second of that. But yes, Bob Cole would absolutely be up there for me because he was the soundtrack to my hockey youth. There's no question. I think Chris Cuthbert is second to none. Absolutely love his call. Man, oh man. Gord Miller, I'm a big fan of, especially with the World Juniors coming up. We'll hear a lot of Gord again. And, I know he gets a lot of hate because if you don't like the Leafs, you're not going to like Joe Bowen because he's just so damn enthusiastic. But there's something special about him. And you know what? Joe came through the same league that I'm in right now. He used to call games for the Sudbury Wolves. So every time I go up to Sudbury, I think about that, Joe doing that job in that booth all those years ago, and look at him now. So there's a guy that I really get a kick out of.
Another question for you is, so I know you've probably been through a ton of coaches. Is there one coach from either the Kitchener or any other teams that you really like to interview more than others?
Oh, wow. That is a good question. George Burnett, who is now the general manager in Guelph. And it's funny because guys would tease me about enjoying my conversations. George is a little on the drier side, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Brian Kilray goes without question the winningest coach in OHL history, and I've had the chance to speak with him on a number of occasions over the years. Was absolutely fantastic. Who else from, you know what? Jay McKee, former Buffalo Sabre, of course, and St. Louis Blue, and Pittsburgh Penguin. Anyway, but mostly with Buffalo. He coached in Kitchener for a bit, now still coaches in the league with the Brantford Bulldogs. Just a terrific guy and great, just great to talk to. Those would be names that immediately jump out to me for sure.
Awesome. And how long have you been doing play-by-play announcing, and has it always been with the Rangers?
Oh, so here's a little something about me. I had a feeling you would ask this. And I guess I've been around long enough now. Like, I must have got that question, Dan, last year. I remember walking to the rink on opening night 2023. And a scout that I've known forever, as we're walking into the rink together, he yells across the parking lot, "Hey, Farzy, you're back for another year." I'm like, "Yeah, Halls, I'm back for another year." He said, "How many years you been doing this now?" I said, "Halsey, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea. I don't know why I haven't ever really kept track, but just because, see, I want you to know I prepared for this podcast too, Dan. I prepared for this event. So I can tell you with certainty that this is year number 24 for me in the Ontario Hockey League. And no, not every year has been with the Kitchener Rangers. I started out in Guelph with the Guelph Storm.
That's awesome. I know, speaking like for hockey, and some people who don't know hockey, hockey is hard to tell years because it just keeps rolling. Like it just keeps rolling one after another. It's like your time off might be like 4 months, and then you're prepping for the next one.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'm just weird that way. I haven't kept track. Like it's a job. Like I maybe people keep track of the number of years they've done their job. I don't know, but I think we put a lot of emphasis on how many years, how many games. Well, I don't know, but how many babies did a doctor help give birth to? You know, like I don't know. I don't know if they keep track, but for me, I just go to work and I'm glad they keep asking me back.
What has been your favorite moment to call as a play-by-play announcer?
Oh, that's another really good one. Oh gosh. Okay, so they're starting to flood in right now. Flood in. Jeff Skinner's 50th goal in 2010. He picks off a pass at his own blue line, goes in, beats Jordan Binnington, backhand shelf with about 11 seconds. In the final minute, it was maybe 17 seconds, but it was less than 30 seconds to go. And you just knew when he took that puck that he was going to go in and score his 50th. What a way to get your 50th, right? Heck, the next guy after Skinner to score his 50th, when did Yancey do it? Was it 2017, 2018? Forgive me that I'm forgetting the year, but 2020. Anyway, he scored his 50th by scoring 4 goals in his final home games. He was on 46, and the talk going into the final weekend was, will he make it to 50? Can he get 2 and 2? And he got all 4 in the Friday night game at home. Anyway, but the Skinner one stands out. 2018 Western Conference Final, Game 7 on the road in Sault Ste. Marie. Rangers are down 3-2. 4-3. That's terrible. Anyway, they're down. They pull the goalie for the extra attacker, and Logan Stanley from Kitchener-Waterloo with a clapper from the blue line ties the game and forces overtime with 56 or 7 seconds left. It was incredible. So, and then we lose in double OT. However, I remember it was such an exciting game, and that play, I can still watch it going around the boards. I remember calling out every player's name around the way. Bunneman on the far half wall, rims it around, Stanley at the blue line. Fantastic stuff. That's definitely a highlight. And then obviously 2008, when Kitchener hosted the Memorial Cup and they won the OHL championship. And that was, they were on a record-setting pace. They had only lost 1 playoff game, and no team has gone through the OHL playoffs having lost just 1 game. So they're up 3-0 on Belleville in the OHL final. All they have to do is finish the sweep, and they set a new record, going 16-1 in the playoffs. But Belleville won the next 3 and forced the 7th game. It was wild. And then Kitchener won it pretty handily in Game 7. But calling Game 7 OHL final with your hometown team winning the championship, second to none. I can't wait to do it again. Please, Kitchener Rangers, let me do it again.
Another question for you, because I know probably some people in the chat might not know this, but there's been a lot of NHL players that came out of Kitchener. Can you just name off a few off the top of your head?
Oh, my goodness gracious. I mean, one of my favorites recently, how about Arbor Jacki? And I don't even like the name or the team, pardon me, that he plays for. But, and that guy's story, I remember he was a free agent walk-on to Kitchener. I remember watching him in the preseason, and I watched his skating, and I'm like, yeah, I hope you enjoyed your 1 preseason game here, pal, because you're never coming back. And then he just worked, and I love the kid to death. So anyway, Arbor Jacki, Jeff Skinner, Gabriel Landeskog, Al McInnes, Brian Bellows. There's so many guys that we could run through. But yeah, it's an organization, obviously, after 60 plus years, that has a lot of guys that graduate on and become NHLers. Radek Faksa still playing for Pete DeBoer with Dallas right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of guys.
And so another question for you is, do you ever want to do a play-by-play in the NHL if the opportunity ever arises?
I don't think so anymore. I mean, listen, if somebody said to me, hey, kid, we'll call you up for a game, or we could really use a guy to fill in on a game somewhere, I don't think I'd say no to it. But in terms of pursuing that as a career goal, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I did earlier on. I remember making a short list with an American Hockey League team. That was one of my first opportunities. And then my most recent was probably about 10 years ago, and it was close. We were down to talking about the ins and outs of what it was going to look like. And I decided, you know what? Things are pretty good in Kitchener. It's my hometown. I've got a decent, full-time job by day in radio, which is, takes pretty good care of me. I get to go to my hometown rink where there's 6,500 or 7,000 fans for every home game. It's like my own little hockey night in Kitchener. So I love it. And so short answer would be no. If they called and said, we need you to come up for a game and fill in, I'm there 100%. But I'm not pursuing it as a career option anymore.
No, it's sometimes I find to stay loyal to what you know.
Yeah, I'm a believer in that too.
Because it's what got you there in the first place. They gave you the opportunity, and it's like Crosby. He's never going to leave Pittsburgh. He's so loyal to that team that he's going to stick with them even through the worst of stuff that's going on right now too.
Exactly.
And he's just going to be a professional through the whole thing, because that's just who he is how he was raised, and it's how he is.
100%. Good old Maritime boy.
Yeah, that's definitely. So I got a question for you, because I'm just starting to get into it. How big is the analytics for the OHL? Like, are a lot of teams using this, or do the coaches still go by feel of the game?
No, analytics is playing a fairly large role in it right now. The Rangers have a director of analytics. There's a team that works under him. It's definitely not the be all and end all, but just like we're seeing in the pros, absolutely analytics plays a part.
And like the Rangers play style, how would you say their play style is? Like, are they more defensive style, more offense? How would you say their play style is?
I think they trick me, Dan, because I talk to these coaches a lot, and they are absolutely defense first. They stress puck management. They stress defensive responsibility. And the thing is, and look, I don't have the luxury of really watching the game with the full 360 view. I have to follow the puck and tell my listeners who's got it and what they're doing with it, right? So it's a different perspective. But so I'm kind of getting on a tangent. But my point is, they're very exciting. Like, they had 6 goals last night, which is a pretty good night at the office. So if they are as defensive as the coach is telling me, I'm expecting to watch them, run a trap and win games 2-1 or 3-2 every night. But they don't. They're like, they scored 9 goals in the game already this season and stuff. So I will say they are a defense first, or a defensively responsible team. But man, when they want to go, they got some horses that'll gallop.
My next question is, because I've been following him, and I know he's had a down year the last year, but what are your thoughts on Michael Misa?
I'm a big fan, and this is his draft year now. I mean, it didn't help that he was injured last year, for sure. Michael Misa is going to be a first rounder to the National Hockey League. There's no question about it. The kid's got next level speed. He's got a hell of a shot. He can make plays. He's the complete package. I don't have any doubt in my mind that Michael Misa will be a first rounder, probably a top 10 pick to the National Hockey League in June.
Awesome. I guess is chat. You got any questions for Mike? Let us know. And Mike, do you have any questions for the show or the chat?
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody again. As I said, I'm doing my best to pay attention, but I see some of the things scroll out of my peripheral vision there to keep an eye on what the chatters are saying. And I really appreciate the support and the kind words, and anybody else that's signed up to the OHL Podcast YouTube channel. We have some fun there, and I'd love to have a few more people on board to have fun with us and keep up with what's going on here. And I love the work you're doing, Dan. So I really appreciate you including me in this tonight.
Thank you. I got a question for you too. Do you ever think the OHL will expand?
100%. 100%. It might expand as early as next season. I think that's the talk right now anyway, that they might add 2 teams as early as next year. That would be really ambitious, but yes, there's no question in my mind. The last expansion for the OHL was back in 1998. So they are probably due to add a few more teams. And I think that, yep.
What cities do you expect, maybe?
I think the first 2 to come on board are going to be Muskegon and Youngstown out of the USHL, because they've already been kicking tires to join the Ontario Hockey League. And so that makes me think there might be more USHL teams that want to jump on and become part of the Ontario Hockey League. Within Ontario, there used to be a team in Belleville, and I can practically guarantee there will be a team in Belleville again, and they will likely add another team in the Greater Toronto area, would be my guess. But I'm positive on Belleville, and I think there will be more USHL teams than Muskegon and Youngstown joining the OHL.
So will that create a new alignment for them, or?
Oh, for sure. And that's one of the, great grievances in the Ontario Hockey League. The way we've got the northernmost team is in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and their closest road trip is 3.5 hours away. Just to put that in perspective, I'm on a road trip tomorrow, and it's 20 minutes down the road. Like, it's not even a road trip. I could walk to the game if I wanted to Guelph. So it's different for the Sioux. But how do you properly align the league so that the Sioux, they have to travel the furthest anyway, but everybody gets their knickers in a knot when you start talking about realignment or rebalancing schedules and stuff. So we'll see. But yes, when they add teams, they're going to have to figure out a new structure.
Dig had a question here. What advice could you give an aspiring YouTubers or people trying to have a career in media?
Yeah, great question, Dig. And the number one thing I say to people that have, tried to come through traditional media as well, and what you're doing online, YouTube wise, etc., the hours you invest in the on-air chair matter. So just keep. One of my very first bosses used to like to say, practice makes improvement. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect, he said. Not even Wayne Gretzky. I argued with him about that, but I accepted it after a minute. But you keep working at it. You practice, and every time you practice, you get a little bit better. It's the whole Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing. Once you've got 10,000 hours under your belt, you might be okay at something.
That's awesome. So for me, like as a coach, I haven't really dived into analytics a bit right now. I've been mostly do feel, and I like to throw my opponent off a little bit. So for our last game in Sedma last year, we were actually tied going into the third period with 59 seconds left, and I put my defenseman out as a forward, and did he not get the puck and win the game with 3 seconds left?
You're the coach of the year, Dan. You're the coach of the year.
So I had 3 defense and 3 forwards out there, and it worked out really well because they weren't expecting a defenseman to play forward.
Fantastic.
So I like the little mind games as a coach. But trickery. Like a couple of the coaches I really follow and love watching is like the Paul Maurices, the John Cooper, who I think is so good as a coach. And just what he does with Tampa Bay. He could have like the worst players and they'd still give it his all.
Yeah.
Like your Pete DeBoer. Great one is one I really like, and that's, like I said, Herb Brooks, even though I love Herb Brooks. Like the quotes and how he really got that team to be together. And that's all he wanted. He didn't want them to play for the name on the back. He wanted them to play for the name on the front. And that's all he wanted out of that whole thing.
Yeah, those are great role models, my man. Those are great role models for sure.
But no, definitely. I guess we're an hour in, and Mike, what's your favorite NHL team? I know you answered that, but that's from John there.
Don't hate me, John, but I love the Leafs. I always have. Feel sorry for me because I was born in 1971, and we all know when the Leafs last won something. So in my entire life, I have not seen them win a damn thing, but I'm still a Leafs fan.
Do you follow any other teams from the I know you said Guelph was your first team. Do you still follow Guelph?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you're in the league, and again, there are only 20 teams, so I try to keep up with all of them. And that's one of the reasons I do the OHL podcast, because I want people to have a general understanding of the entire league. And we try to bring that every week on the show.
And do you think that the Bruins can win the Stanley Cup?
No,
that's from
I hope the Bruins get a bomb dropped on. No, I shouldn't say that. Please. But no, I hate the. Why did you do that on purpose? Didn't you? Did that on purpose. Bruins are our arch nemesis.
Why don't you tell everybody about your show, your radio show? Because that's a great listen too.
Yeah, if you're ever in the mood for some streaming between 9 and 1 Eastern time every day, 9 a.m. till 1 p.m., I host a daily 4-hour talk show on 570 News Radio out of Kitchener. I do quite a bit of local stuff, so I don't know how much you want to know about the city of Kitchener or the region of Waterloo, but we get into some bigger stuff too. We talk federal politics and stuff, and every once in a while I'll bring on my correspondents from Atlantic Canada because I love it. I've got my favorite newfies out there in Bell Island right now, so it's fantastic.
On your podcast, have you ever had a favorite guest that you had on there?
On the podcast?
Yeah.
Oh,
like
gosh.
Any favorite people that you've had on? Or
yeah, Craig Hartsburg I've had on, Sherry Basson, who's just a legend in the Ontario Hockey League. Brian Kilray has been on. Dave McQueen was a coach in this league for a long, long time. Steve Spott's been on as a guest before. I had lots of guys I really, really enjoyed. Alan Bester, I know I've admitted to being that Leafs fan that I am, but he was great to have on. So, yeah, I've had some fun with it for sure.
And then our last question, what do you think of the World Juniors?
Can't wait to hear the roster. But look, if it's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that Canada is the furthest thing from a shoe-in these days. So many other talented nations in the world.
Definitely. Barry said, who was your favorite?
Johnny
WK?
Fever. Johnny Fever, baby. All the way. Great question.
Dig said, sneak in some Raptors talk.
Oh, what do you want from me? Tall people playing basketball, shooting at a hoop. That's my worst sport by far.
No, it's been a pleasure having you on, Mike. I really enjoyed this and getting to know the little bit more ins and outs of the Kitchener Rangers and your job too as well. Like there's a lot that goes into being a play-by-play that I didn't think a lot of people knew. And it's really great.
Yeah, I love the work that I do, and I'm always happy to talk about it. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. And if you want any more, that OHL podcast is a great glimpse into the Ontario Hockey League. And I'm pretty searchable on Google if you want to learn more about the crap that I do on a daily basis. So you're welcome to do that.
And what do you think of the CHL versus the USHL? I think it is going on.
Yeah, I think it's been great for the CHL. We talked about that NCAA rule change, and this just makes the CHL look better and better because they dominated those two games. So it was a big win for the CHL. Sorry to our American friends.
And then the last question I have, because I think it's really interesting, and we've been covering it for the last 4 shows, is what are your thoughts on Team Canada for the Four Nations Cup?
I'm always going to be a Team Canada guy first. And I mean, even though I just acknowledged the great hockey nations in the world, but listen, I think we got a chance to put a whale of a team together. I can't wait till Wednesday when those rosters are announced.
My biggest thing is the goaltending. I think the other teams have the better goaltending right now.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
Especially since we don't have a Carey Price right now, and we don't have one like that really standout goalie that we are so normally have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. We got to start developing more goaltending. Hey, I hear you've got 2 kids that are going to help us out with that, Dan.
One, my stepson is a huge Devils fan. Looked up DeMartin Brodeur.
Attaboy. Perfect example. Perfect example.
Matthew keeps asking, so I'll ask it. Do you think the New York Rangers can win the Stanley Cup?
The next team that gets to win the Stanley Cup is the Leafs. That's it. End of story. It's our turn, guys. Settle down here.
One other thing is, from the OHL, which player do you think had the better career in the NHL so far or to date?
So the best NHL career out of any OHLer ever?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, Wayne Gretzky. He played for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. So there you go.
Any current ones?
I think Connor McDavid's going to finish pretty strong for sure.
Definitely. And you could pretty much say all the London Knights too, because I think that whole team's all draft picks from this year.
Yeah, you certainly could. They have a way of cranking out some great players, that's for sure.
And I think Toronto got a really good player in that Easton Cowan.
Yep, they certainly do. 53-game point streak in the OHL.
Which is unheard of. And he was like, what, 1 game off from the Doug Gilmour?
Yep. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, Mike. I thank you for your time. And I know you're on a 20-minute road trip tomorrow, so I don't want to keep you too long.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
But thank you, and hopefully we can have you on again.
All right, just reach out anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, and appreciate it. And Mike, as is a custom on the show, we let the guests close it out as they would close out their own podcast or televised segment.
Well, I sign off every Kitchener Rangers broadcast by saying, my name is Mike Farwell, and I bid you a very good night from insert arena name and city here. So I'll say, my name is Mike Farwell. Thanks very much for listening, and I bid you a very good night from my basement in Kitchener, Ontario.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, chat.
Thanks,
have a great
everybody.
night.
You too. Bye-bye.